Naval officers are on the front line of implementing U.S. foreign policy. In such a role, they must be aware of public perception, the current climate, and the implications of their actions abroad. Perhaps there is no better example of this awareness and sensitivity than the story of Captain Sigsbee, the commanding officer of the USS Maine that was blown up in Havana Harbor in 1898. Today, on A History of the Navy in 100 Objects, we are joined by Charles Swift, Managing Director of the museum, for the rest of the story.
Today we're talking about the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor on February 15, 1898. Specifically, we're talking about the telegrams that the commanding officer of the Maine sent. We're talking about two telegrams sent by Captain Charles Sigsbee, the captain of the Maine. One of the telegrams that he sends upon the explosion of the Maine goes to the Secretary of Navy in Washington, D.C. It's a very detailed telegram explaining the situation and what needs to happen in order to support the sailors of the Maine after the explosion. The second telegram is a telegram sent to a friend of his who's a commanding officer in Key West, Florida. The important thing about the telegram that he sends to Key West is that it's actually different than the one that he sends to the Secretary of the Navy.
Listen to the difference between the two telegrams Sigsbee sent. The first was addressed to the Secretary of the Navy and reads, Secretary, Washington, D.C. Maine blown up in Havana Harbor at 9:40 tonight and destroyed. Many wounded and doubtless more killed or drowned. Wounded and others aboard Spanish man-of-war Ward Line steamer. Send lighthouse tenders from Key West for crew and the few pieces of equipment above water. No one has clothing other than that upon him. Public opinion should be suspended until further report. All officers believed to be saved. Jenkins and Merritt not yet accounted for. Many Spanish officers, including representative of General Blaine, now with me to express sympathy, Sigsbee. Now, the second, addressed to his friend in Key West. Forsyth, Key West. Tell Admiral, Maine blown up and destroyed. Send lighthouse tenders, many killed and wounded. Don't send war vessels if others available. Sigsbee.
In this telegram, which is very brief, it's about 50 words long, as opposed to the much longer one sent to the Secretary of the Navy, Sigsbee emphasizes that do not send warships to Havana Harbor if at all possible. Why? Because tensions are very high at this point in American history between Spain and the United States. Spain is almost on the verge of war with the United States. Newspapers in the United States are urging war, but Sigsbee realizes that the appearance of warships in Havana Harbor is going to make a bad situation even worse. The question is, how do we get this telegram? The first telegram, the one that is sent to the Secretary of the Navy, ends up in the National Archives. We, of course, have the second telegram that Sigsbee sent. On board the Maine with Sigsbee was an embedded reporter who was also a captain in the U.S. Army, George Ray. Sigsbee cannot leave the ship, so he has to have somebody he trusts take the telegrams to the telegram office to be sent. He writes them out, gives them to George Ray. Ray takes them to the telegram office, and they're sent. It's interesting that there's an embedded reporter on board the Maine at the time. It's not something that we generally think of as being a phenomenon in the 19th century. But in fact, embedded reporters do have a long tradition in American history. The first telegram, the one that goes to the Secretary of Navy, is returned by Ray to Sigsbee, who ultimately gives it to the Navy, where it is deposited at the National Archives. The second telegram, though, the draft of the second telegram, is kept by Ray and given to his daughter, who ultimately donates it to the United States Naval Academy Museum in the 1930s, where it's become a permanent part of our collection. And we like having this because it does show how naval officers have to think under pressure, and that Sigsbee realizes the implications of the orders that he is going to be giving and what he is asking for, and immediately knows that if he brings warships into Havana Harbor, bad things are going to happen. Ultimately, something bad does happen. The drumbeat for war continues, especially in the American press, and 2 months after the explosion in Havana Harbor, the United States finds itself declaring war on Spain.
Naval officers today continue to operate with the knowledge that their actions can affect more than themselves and can even have implications on a national scale. Come to the Naval Academy Museum to learn more stories of the Navy on the national stage. Thanks for joining us today on the podcast.